Lou Meyer, Brad Samuelson, Bob Kelly, myself, and which is Greg Young, and Ashley. And online, everybody should be able to see that is Adriel, Danielle, George, and Jeannie.
Chris Etner's here too. Hello.
Oh, Chris. Oh, there you are down in the corner. That's interesting. You're in a. We don't see them all listed. There we go. Thanks, Chris, for pointing that out.
No problem.
All right, so several things I wanted to talk about. The agenda essentially says continued discussion on the allocation framework and policy, but there's lots of pieces and parts to that. So don't know if there's any place you guys want to start in particular. I have some thoughts before we pull up some documents, but
Is there any public comment right now? This item's not on the agenda.
it's all right.
I'll make the announcement that this morning at 10 o'clock, LeGrand Athlone had its Intertie project groundbreaking ceremony.
Oh, good.
So DWR was there, a couple assembly members, staff members. Ashley came, several MID folks. Yeah, there's probably 30 people out there. They're breaking ground. Let's see, May 22nd, I believe. So next
Awesome.
week.
Exciting.
We have about $7 million in grant funding, and currently working with the EPA WIFIA program on financing the remaining, basically 20 million, which looks really promising. So ideally, we start construction in a couple days, and then the financing comes into place before we use up all the grant money and keep rolling.
Do you know who your bond attorney is for that?
Well, I'm working, yeah, Doug Brown. Do you know who that is?
I don't know that name.
He works a lot on WIFIA
Yeah,
loans, and then we're working with a financial advisor out of Irvine, Robert Poor.
yeah. I know that name. And then Reed Glyer is a big WIFIA attorney.
Do you know what they could very?
I'm
very
sure they're
easily
probably
be
the same.
John Gonzalez is a junior attorney that I'm working with under Doug Brown.
I'm sure it's Reed's team.
Okay.
I think he does all the stuff.
There's these guys, basically, I've seen their portfolio. The financial advisor and the bond counsel do hundreds of millions of WIFIA.
Yeah, yeah. Then I'm
There's
sure
a
it's
couple
him.
people you go to.
Yeah, then I'm sure it's him.
Oh, you want to talk to the director and
Brad, just so
He's a good friend.
don't go in too much detail, but basically, can you tell me how long the intertie is going to be and what its capacity and stuff?
Yep, it's a 125 CFS capacity, new canal and pipeline. It's the very expensive portion of the canal of the project is actually upgrading MID's existing infrastructure. So we're upgrading, this is the southeastern corner of MID's facilities, the booster 3 lateral that we're connected to. And at that facility, we're only able to, or MID is only able to deliver about 35 CFS. So upstream of that, we're replacing all of the constricting points,
Right.
to the tune of $11.1 million. So that's phase 2, is improvements on MID's infrastructure. Phase 1, which we're starting right now, is the new canal, 125 CFS. It's like 2.1 miles of new construction. And then that connects MID, and then that facility has turnouts into Little Deadman, and Dutchman Creeks, which then bring new surface water to a bunch of the Grand Athlone farmers downstream of those points. So then and that's phase one. From there, it continues south towards the Chowchilla River. The ideal, at the end of the day, the project will be bi-directional and connect Merced ID to Chowchilla Water District through the Grand Affluent. Basically,
More flexibility
more flexibility is exactly right.
for when water does show up.
Mostly off peak.
Yeah,
It's 125 CFS, which is a massive facility for having no water rights, but we're counting on shoulder season water. And that's why it's overbuilt.
got a new addition in the room here. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Daniel Machado. I'm out of Stevenson, Bob's neighbor.
Welcome. So, and you're part of the public then, right? I would assume,
Yeah.
because you're not, I always forget who's actually on TAC, so.
They were.
Yeah,
He has been, but I
I don't
mean,
know if
it's
he's still
currently,
I will double check.
it's just Blake Nervino and myself, I think.
Okay, and
I
then
can't remember.
Clarkin has just joined on Zoom also.
Okay, great. So again, for the newcomers, because we're still trying to figure out all the great things Lacey did all the time, and we're continuing to grow. And
One of
learn
them was
that.
meeting all Brown Act
And we
requirements.
Sorry
we
about that.
we missed the posting of the agenda 48 hours in advance, so this officially cannot be a voting
That's a hard job.
TAC meeting, but we wanted to still hold it because we knew people would schedule time, so people were flying up. And so trying to make sure we take advantage and learn and listen and have conversation ongoing on this. So that's just for some information for you and for Larkin. So congrats. I see you already got out of your suit and tie after the ceremony and everything.
I did go fancier than the normal farmer shirt, but I didn't go suit and tie either. I would have been out of place. In the dirt field.
Yeah, yeah. Well, good job. Congrats. I'm glad that's moving.
I think can't think of a Sigma Prop 68 project of this magnitude to start construction. Yeah. 20 million.
Yeah, no, and I'm thinking, and maybe you guys are already on it, but we got to figure out good ways that GSA can tout that and that the GSP can include.
We've touted you guys, the GSA and MID, wherever we could, for sure.
Right, that we
Partners,
push
but
it out,
Continue.
but we just push it out more as informational, like, hey, here's pictures of the school groundbreaking. And if the GSP could show as part of their updates of project implementation, they got some photos of it or something, that's like.
I got video. You're gonna have.
Water and Kern is not gonna put video in the GSP, just saying.
Jeez.
But
No,
something,
we're gonna have plenty of media for
something that,
and press release and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, I'm
I
just.
had, it's all good.
I'm thinking to the perspective of showing that we are implementing actions, whether it's demand reduction stuff or whether it's projects, representation of that.
On that note, Sandy Mush finished a 20 CFS pipeline floodmark project, DWR, 100% DWR, Prop 68 funded. That, we could also, we have, for all of our reporting requirements of Prop 68, we have photos,
Yeah.
stuff like that. We can we need to go through GSP too.
Yeah, actually, maybe.
Greg, this is George.
Yeah,
Also, when you get down to tabulating all these accomplishments for the update for the GSP, then Lone Tree will have some projects that can add to that also.
right in the back door. Okay, appreciate that, George.
Just make a note of it for that.
We're gonna, Ashley and I will get with Chris Hughes probably at Water and Kern and ask what's gonna be their process for that information to upload and whether they're Are we missing something? We want to make sure we get it pushed up there and then we can help
I can't
facilitate.
remember who it is, but usually every year for the annual report, I work with somebody where we're current on
Yeah,
write-ups.
that's but is that because Lacey's pushing it? Again, one of those things where like, oh, another thing she was doing.
Yeah, the sooner, Lacey probably prompted where we're current to reach
Yeah.
out, where if not, we just get it at the last minute.
Okay, let's flag that to make sure we're getting those things, because again, those are super important, I think, optics. I mean, they're important projects, period, but they're important to demonstrate movement when when folks at the state level are gonna be bitching about other pieces, say, look, we're doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You don't move so fast, right? Okay, any other public comment for things not on the agenda? Okay, let's move on. We can't approve the minutes because this is not an official voting meeting, but if you want to review the minutes and had any thoughts, let us know, or let Ashley know, and we can always make any corrections prior to the next TAC, which we'll need to schedule by the time we get to the end of this meeting. Make sure we get that one properly agendized. Nothing, any comments, any thoughts on the minutes? Okay. So the main part of the allocation framework, just wanted to discuss that, and there's kind of three things I think along those lines, kind of big picture. One, to revisit and discuss more about the suggested language that TAC put in front of the board on Thursday. Related, but a little bit tangential is Ben Crane's remarks at the board meeting, and just maybe talk through some of that and what thoughts are. I don't know if you were there.
No.
So we can give you the quick overview when we get there. Also, your points of continuing to get information out. We wanted to talk about what we're doing for these pins for the groundwater accounting framework, and that Ashley and I were talking on the way down today about
pins for the
pin to be able to get in.
the password. Got it.
Password. Sorry. Yeah, that's probably a better way.
I was
And
acting like I knew what you're talking about. I'm like, I have no idea what he's talking about.
So let me just hit
Maybe
that
I should
one.
just ask.
Let me just, yeah, it's always better. Let me
Always better.
hit that one first. Our thought is, first of all, we're doing a double window thing like this, so it looks somewhat official. I know you guys can't see this on the TV, but
We try to open the video, so you fit.
I'll hold it up to the camera. I see that would be,
Yeah, we can see it. Thanks.
maybe looks a little more official when it comes in the mail with the GSA's logo, and this would be the simplest way to do it, because we can create a letter, fold it, because all these letters have to have a mail merge with an address and a PIN password that associates with certain parcels that are in the groundwater accounting framework. And our thought is that we include a second sheet that will just be a kind of overview of the allocation framework and numbers right now. Just again, an informational piece, because you could have that and you could just see what's, quick summary overview and be directed for getting in touch with the GSA for more information and more discussion. So it was,
You were kind of part of it when Madera rolled out, and I know that there was only Stephanie in the office in Madera County.
yeah,
Does Ashley have anybody who's gonna answer the phone after these letters go out?
no, they're gonna get passed and directed probably to us, and Adriel will help and we'll try and respond. Right, that's again, part of the challenge. That's bigger picture questions on budget and finding staff.
Because I remember there was like office hours, because
Mhm.
farmers don't do well on the phone on computers. You gotta be able to sit down with them.
Yeah.
That takes so much time. It was basically office hours is what I think Stephanie ended up doing.
And maybe that's a thing to try and do for,
When it rolls out.
yeah, like 2025 calendar year, when it's a test period, when we're a pilot period, because we don't want to call it a dry run. As Mike
Done
had
that too
pointed
many
out.
times.
That's on there.
Yeah, bad, just not the best term to use. That I think maybe that's a really good idea, is to open up a little bit more for giving access at designated times for people to come in and talk.
Because someone's gonna wanna be sat
Yep.
there in the chair and you say, okay, now type your
Yep.
password.
Yep.
Your kid's name with
Yep.
your favorite Corvette, you know, or whatever it is.
Your favorite club. So starting down the path, you guys last meeting had suggested trying to do more and more outreach in more places. So we were thinking at a minimum that this letter that's going to go out, that's going to give people the access to the groundwater accounting platform for all the irrigated parcels. They will start, they will also have a letter or a brochure, flyer in there that's talking about the allocation for the GSA and pointing some more direction. That might also then be a thing we can get pushed through the Farm Bureau and talk to Brianna about doing that more. So we're hearing the TAC make those recommendations, and so we're thinking about how to do it.
When's it going out?
This is hopefully going out next week. We're finalizing the merging, like as an example, Bob Kelly has several parcels that over time, the platform team has organized under one account. And we're reorganizing because there was effort done before to help him out. We're reorganizing that back under one account. A few of those things are getting cleaned up. George, yours is getting organized under one PIN. A few of those things. So the intent is probably towards the end of next week, a letter's drafted. There's going to be a second letter because we do have a set of lands that are not designated as any of the irrigated agricultural designations by the assessor office, but are irrigated. There's a corporate land, there's some larger.
What's corporate land?
Light corporate, light commercial,
Oh,
sorry,
commercial.
my bad, sorry, commercial, light commercial. There's some lands that are residential, rural residential, that are 5 acres, 10 acres irrigating. There's some lands that are grazing that are definitely irrigating. When we overlaid some of the DWR parcel layers and investigated that, Merkeen has brought several to us that they're even delivering water to that are showing up as grazing. So that second letter, we're going to send out saying, hey, we want to give you, it looks like you're irrigating. We want to give you access to this platform, but because it'll be important. But we have a land classification issue right now as it relates to the policy framework, which says you got to be irrigated to get sustainable yield, the native sustainable yield in the APA. And otherwise you're going to be opting in, and you're going to opt in for the sustainable yield and have other limitations put on you and have fees. So there's a conversation that's started at the board level and within the strategic ad hoc to talk about addressing some of those. So we have to do a second letter. We want to get that drafted and try and get them all out at the same time, because I think that was your question. The hope is maybe by the end of next week, we get them all out. The platform was making a couple of they're continually making adjustments, and they're making a few more that should roll out soon, hopefully by next week. That'll probably be really helpful. So we didn't want to get out in front of that and then a week later have people have something change enough in the platform where it
So it's not officially done yet either, right?
the platform.
Or is this, everything that's being sent out, is it put together or no?
So what this will give you is an identifying number. So when you log in and create an account on the platform and you type in that PIN, it should have all of your parcels shown there.
That's all this is about.
That's what it's there right now, to start kind of seeing that and start looking at your parcels and what their historic use is, what their current use is. So you can just get some comfort and some understanding of the quantities on kind of a per acre and a per field and a per account basis as it relates to conversations about the allocation quantities. So you can orient a little bit better.
Mhm.
And then going forward, and so it'll have dummy allocation numbers in there called samples, sample allocation, example. So people can kind of look at it in context of how this might,
How they fit.
how they start to fit and how you might be tracking to monitor your use. There's buckets, there will be buckets for all your other sources of water, surface water, some recharge credits, seepage water, other things like that, but all those are zeroed out. And because we don't have any of that information, we don't want to try and force that in there, so just recognize that those limits will be there at this point. So it's trying to really just focus on the groundwater piece and getting people comfortable with that platform and get further input, and then also help raise awareness for the allocation conversations. Does that get your question? Okay. So that's the information coming out in the letter. We think this looks official enough with kind of a logo on there, and maybe people won't just toss it. Some people will anyway, but
What are you gonna do, Aaron?
Greg, are we going back to the groundwater accounting platform, or
yeah, this is all part of the
this,
conversation.
this was just talking about the newsletter? Because
Um,
I just was gonna, for Daniel's edification of, what's going on with the groundwater accounting platform. It's been newly created. It has everything tracked by ownership. But what needs to get organized is how it's managed. A lot of you feels you've got multiple partnerships or whatnot, but you're the manager, and they're all irrigated the same way. So it's nice to be able to group those in your platform. So when the numbers come up as to what the consumptive use is according to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when the numbers come up according to satellite imagery as to how much water is consumptively used, you're managing, this group of parcels that's all under one, let's just say, a common irrigation system.
one
Yeah,
bucket of water.
yeah. So
No, Bob, it's more than just one system, though. It could be just one system, but it could be multiple.
it could be, yeah.
Multiple
I mean, this means
irrigation.
one bucket of water.
It's more than the bucket of water. It's your bucket of flexibility if you want. So anything that, like Stevenson Corp, or like, you want it all one big pocket, one big group of farm. In Madera, they call them farming units. And then all of your allocation from your parcels get combined into one number that you then get to use, as opposed to, if it was by entities. I mean, some families, every parcel is owned by a different entity. You'd be limited to only water that's, each APN generates an allocation. And then you wouldn't want to be limited to only put that water back on that APN. You want to be able to share that across.
Yeah, because then people are going to inherently want to take some of this and put it over here, right?
Yeah, and that's
Different
what,
crops have different demands,
Sure.
different soils. Let me
And
manage
we've
my
got-
own water.
Yeah, we have a series of entities. We've got pipelines going from one to the next, because it's all the same ownership. So it's like separating that would be a zoo.
I'm gonna manage all my own water.
so that is why I want to start with the platform, because these conversations we'll look at with some definitions and things to start playing into what we're calling an allocation management account. Starts talking about this flexibility and how you can move water and what is that boundary, so you can be managing in the most flexible manner. So yeah, that platform is intended to help you track your bucket of groundwater allocation plus other sources of water. So if you're found to, amongst all your parcels, use 2,000 units and your allocation bucket had 1,500 units somewhere in the future, and somebody says, well, you overused or overpumped, you're like, no, I actually used a whole bunch of surface water. I didn't use any of my groundwater. And you can then be able to move that, continue forward into your buckets and things.
Greg, do you know if?
Yeah, it's just one more thing. We want all the farmers involved in irrigating. We want them to get on this platform and look for all their parcels, because there could be a land classification that because they're going off the county's assessor's records as to that's what that parcel is. But they may be wrong. The county's records may be wrong. So the only way to do that is to get on the platform, look at your parcels, see if they're all listed. If they're not all listed, then you got a land classification problem. And then to the extent that it would help you to understand how much water is being used, try to group them in management units.
Yeah, so we're going to be able to, on the back end, also see who's signing up. So let's say you come in and you've grabbed all of these parcels. you've grabbed yours, you didn't grab yours.
You're gonna
It'd be
know.
like, oh, hold it, there's some that aren't grabbed.
For sure.
They're tied with Brad, let's call Brad and say, hey, or vice versa. So
Yeah.
we're, hopefully we'll be able to see some,
Eventually, every APN should be. claimed.
absolutely, every APN is gonna need a
It
designation.
irrigates,
at
it
some
should be
point.
claimed.
Um,
And we have a year to do this now, because
Well-
it doesn't really get in,
Yeah, until calendar year 26 is when it all starts.
yeah,
Calendar year
Yeah,
25 will
you really
be.
have
over a year,
test.
yeah.
And to your point, it needs to be the grazing lands too, because we need to know whether they opted in or not opted in officially. And so they're all gonna be flagged that way in some way. So we can be able to see that in the back end. And help us make sure all the parcels are getting accounted for, and we don't have parcels just hanging out there with somebody unaware of a restriction that might be on them. So the platform for that purpose, and as you just described it, Bob, is the flexibility plays into these conversations I want to have about the current draft work in progress language that the board, a subcommittee of the board is discussing and developing. So this has not even been, it's not fully vetted. But we want to, because of time, we're looking to try and get all this stuff figured out here in the next, 30 days, essentially. We're wanting to get input and thoughts on this language here that we'll share. It relates to your guys' representation and your recommendation that was brought, Lou, that you brought forward at the last meeting, because that also plays into these parcel designations and some questions about how that might play. I want to table that part because I think when we start looking at the definitions and looking at some of the questions or how it's being laid out, that conversation will naturally come in some place. But if it's not, let's make sure we're not forgetting to cover that. At the last board meeting this week, the bolded part was the recommendation, with some background if you want. So Ashley, you can share screen, right? So
Yeah, or I have these here, or I can have Adriel share his, whichever you want to do.
Adriel, do you want to, I know this puts Adriel on the spot a little bit, but Adriel, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I can do that. Which document do you want to start with? Just the outline first?
The outline, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Close this.
3 documents ultimately we're going to be looking at. The outline has all of the sections that are currently contemplated in this policy. And the other 2 documents are just more expansion on 2 of those subsets, but they were easier to work on in a separate document than to include. Let's go ahead and make it bigger there, Adriel. Perfect. And if you click home again, you'll actually, the whole menu bar will collapse.
Ooh.
Go up to the
Oh,
very,
on gotcha.
up at the very top menu choices where you have file, home, insert. Yeah, there you go. That just allows more of the page to see. So the document, for purposes of what we're going to plan to intend to adopt in July, will be as much as this as we can get drafted and get everybody bought into, but it may not be all of it. We will continue to work on it. The board will continue to work on it and adopt a full set of policies soon thereafter. And you'll see why that, there might be some definitions, there might be some appeal processes and some other things that we haven't fully vetted. Also, this, as well as the current Rule 1 on well consistency, is going to need to get kind of pulled apart and reimagined in some ways, a more traditional ordinance type formatting. And so we'll be doing that, but we didn't want to compound that issue with this adoption. So right now, this is set up as a Rule 2 groundwater allocation policy working draft version here. We're going to scroll through just what all the high level outline elements are. This was also discussed at Thursday's meeting. But as we go through each, we'll just kind of look at some of the underneath parts here. And then we'll jump to a couple of sections that are more fully defined. So the authority just has to talk about the authority, including the ability for the GSA to charge fees associated with aspects of this. There will be some references to this phase 2 establishment, which we probably need to augment the current 2019 fee for administrative costs, because phase 1 sunsets here after one more year. The next section is definitions. There's a whole document we'll jump to in a minute about definitions. The next section is allocation eligibility. This really mimics and will incorporate the language that was in the February policy document about what can qualify and what you get. So it will define the 3 land use categories. It'll refer in the appeals to where we'll deal with land use misclassification. So there's a section in the appeals about misclassification as that goes forward. Irrigated ag lands, managed wetlands, and grazing. And if you recall in that framework, there were 2 types of managed wetland options, depending on whether you wanted flexibility or whether you want to really focus on continuing to just grow your habitat section. Under the irrigated lands, there's also that provision that if you came in and wanted a reduced phase 1 fee because you didn't irrigate, you irrigated less than 75% of the APN and you claimed you wanted a reduction, and there were some that came in, half dozen or so, that requested, they irrigated, I don't know, 30% of the land or something, so they wanted a reduced fee. That letter also said you will have a restricted allocation associated with that. So that will be spelled out there. So this essentially will get populated with the information that's in the current framework that's been out since February.
Is that what your less than 75% irrigated claims as part of
Yes.
phase 1 fee
Yes.
approval?
That's what that is indicating.
Okay.
And that was that document, that appeal document is on the GSA's website, where it talks through that, and there were several that did appeal, and we have the records of who did. So now we go to section 1.5, groundwater allocation types and amounts. And this is where the 2 primary types, the sustainable yield of native groundwater and the additional pumping allowance. And we'll talk about those 2 aspects and where the how that is quantified. And again, we'll restate the limitation on that, on any allocation associated with that reduction in fee. I got to double check if that just reduced the APA or whether it also reduced the sustainable yield. I got to look at the letter again, or that policy. That calculation will identify the 13 inches multiplied by the GIS acreage associated with that APN and the additional pumping allowance aspect that would be applied. Those both apply to the irrigated lands. The first one will apply to opting in lands. Again, it goes back to that prior section. Under AII, the ramp down aspect is where this representation of the pause in the ramp down tied to the 2015 minimum threshold groundwater levels will be discussed and represented, and then the potential for a reversal. And so all of that, again, that's discussed in that framework, there's several bullets that kind of go into more detail in that framework that will be brought in and incorporated into that language there. So there shouldn't be anything new here. I guess that's my point. There's nothing brand new conceptually here.
It's the details of all that.
It's the details.
It's going to be difficult.
And most of the details are in, but it's more in prose, since we need to write it into more regulatory policy text, which sometimes raises additional details that you hadn't contemplated, and we need to.
So what does it mean to reach 2015 levels? Every well that is monitored through the GSP in the
It's a
sustainability zone must be at 2015
It's a
level?
great question, because it's supposed to be an average condition representative for the zone. So the question is, well, how is that getting represented? Because are there a lot of wells? So this goes back into conversations that are ongoing. We've been talking with MSGSA also, and Chris and I even had a conversation earlier today about continuing to expand all of our data gap areas with data that's been submitted, well information that's been submitted. So trying to bring that up so that the source of that data, people are feeling comfortable with. And so we have to keep improving that. So that will just be describing it more, not the details of that. That will have to be represented elsewhere. The policy will just say the average in the sustainability zone as determined by through, you know, whatever process.
Yeah. So for instance, I've seen a map, I think you guys produced it when sustainability zones were way different, but let's say you have a sustainability zone. And this part right here is like is red, and this is all white, like the 2015,
Right.
and this is green, which is above 2015.
Right,
Just
and there was
a-
weighted average of some sort, right? So how we look at that,
How do you look, so is this the 15 levels or not? You got some above, most of it is at, and a little bit above.
right, well, and I think I'll have the answer for you. I don't know if there's not gonna be a right answer.
I
I think
know.
let's represent that the well is getting used for the monitoring network, and it's possibly what Woodard and Kern referenced as the average condition based on their contour mapping. So we're not creating a data,
Yeah.
that it's the data that is consistent for the whole space is where we're gonna have to find that balance. And which then goes back to the wells that are included. There's been data from the Grand Athlone. I think Marquini's provided well data. There's stuff from La Paloma, from down in Larkin's area. There's stuff from Stevenson, Marquini that aren't currently included in the full monitoring network. We're continuing to expand and improve upon that. That's an ongoing conversation. I don't want to have the details of that in this policy, rather a reference that it would be some sort of representative value.
Just needs to be clear from the outset. People know what they're working towards.
Yes.
I think the idea behind the sustainability zones was to minimize that, but I don't think that's gonna be practical. And I think that's like,
eliminate.
yeah, I think that's Larkin's concern, right? Is,
Right.
you know, she's on an island here where she's got high
Ernst-
water.
Her and Scott are in a unique situation.
And
Yeah.
And a couple others.
and a couple others, and we're talking about ways to try and address some of that with alternative buckets that we could look at and other things that are outside the groundwater allocation.
The subsidence study will inform all of that as well, I'm sure.
Yes, that information will be forthcoming also. So if we scroll down further on this considerations, you can see the considerations, the sustainability zone, performance, groundwater levels, subsidence, and then other issues, because again, the framework says you got to get to 2015 levels, but you also have to be meeting all the other objectives that are in there about eliminating subsidence and not having dewatering of domestic wells and these other things. So it's not just levels. The levels are probably best proxy for all this other stuff. So there will be other elements to be thinking about, including these proximity to cork and clay and whether or not there is this team at EKI continues to be working on that with information and trying to understand and bring something forward for the strategic ad hoc to consider. So scrolling down, the consumptive use of an allocation during the calendar year is limited to a maximum of 48 inches as calculated as an average within the associated AMA, which you guys don't have that definition yet, but that's the allocation management account. So that would be essentially equivalent to your farm unit concept, including any allocation transferred into or out of a AMA and account during the same calendar year. What the ad hoc was considering is they didn't want, and I don't think this is ever going to be a restriction, but that if you transferred a bunch of water from one party who's maybe not been using and has a water in their allocation bucket, and they move it to a neighbor who needs some water, you're still restricted to not consuming more than 48 inches on average per acre on those parcels. Very unlikely you're going to get any kind of cropping that's going to be significantly, that's really going to exceed that.
Maybe they're worried about recharge, then moving
This
the
is
water.
the consumption aspect.
Right. I don't know what they're worried about.
In case for somebody trying to, I don't know, just start
Exporting groundwater.
exporting groundwater, creating a larger number, growing I don't know, starting to grow water lilies or something. That it's really about the hydrogeologic conditions. And so if you put just a cap that seems well adequate for everybody, it just is a cautionary thing. This is, but part of the reason for bringing this up is the strategic ad hoc is introducing this and is having this conversation. So it will be there as a potential limit. Is that the right number? I don't know. Do we need an absolute number? I don't know.
I don't want to dwell on this, but I guess I'm not understanding the concern still. So let's say I send all my water to Brad. Under what circumstances would he consume more than, or maybe walk me through
Right,
hypothetical.
so part of the concern originally was you send all your water, we want to restrict you to not send more than 48 inches. But then we were thinking, well, it really doesn't matter. It's about how much Brad can actually consume. So if you want to sell your whole 10 feet of water in one instance, as long as it's within other
So
rules.
like they're worried about, I guess, Brad brokering it. Maybe Brad, oh no, on the ground, it
On the-
has to be consumption.
Yeah,
Consumptive
right.
use.
Right, so it's just basically making sure that you aren't restricted as a party, maybe sharing it to somebody. Because it always comes down to the party consuming has a realistic cap that's probably gonna mean we're not gonna build 7-story greenhouses and start, what do you got down in Ventura? They got some folks doing 7 feet per equivalent acre.
Yeah.
In some of those strawberry systems down there. So it's kind of thinking of it a little bit with that future in mind. But definitely want input and thoughts and let it roll around and rattle around and let's continue to talk about it. So if we continue to scroll, and each one of these you'll see it has appeals, the appeal section. So we're trying not to write appeals that are unique under each one. We're going to have those all down in its own unique section. Sustainability zones, you've seen those, we've discussed those. We'll just be defining those and it'll be referencing some date certain map as that might change over time. There was one recent change that was, as Brad knows, Amsterdam, some parcels in Amsterdam were submitted back in December for the date that was set back in December about moving some in zones and essentially got lost in the mail. So there's about 277 acres that are all connected that were moving from zone 1 into zone 2 to be contiguous with the farming units, or sorry, the farmed parcels.
I just caught 10 acres that we have.
So anything that hasn't been noticed prior to December, because that one has a letter on December 17th or something, we have to bring it in front of the board. That's the process. George, we just found one that's in your area. Oddly enough, it's in zone 6, that should probably be in zone 5. Again, these things are gonna have to get brought forward. They should be no-brainers.
Yes.
But that's gonna be defining that and again, the opportunity to shift any of that stuff. Allocation management account, there's a separate document we'll want to pull up about that. That is where it's gonna be defining what you own. And then also getting into how that relates to sales, leases, and transferring water associated with your account. So we'll talk about that in more detail in just a minute. Monitoring, and we'll talk about how we're going to be using data sources for monitoring that consumptive use. The opportunity, and some of this again may not be fully vetted by the time we adopt in July, but people should recognize this. There's going to be pathways here, and I think that's okay.
Good, real quick, there's a couple spots above where you have fees.
Yes.
There's the new 218 that has to be done, correct?
Well, yes, there has to be. But for some of these things, as far as a processing fee, some of them might be a processing fee. If you want to,
Sigma allows some of these fees without a 218. So.
I believe they do. Now, I might be misspeaking, but if, for instance, in the well consistency document, it says that you could charge a fee to everybody who submits that, but they have yet to actually charge a fee. Because that's just covering the cost of doing that effort. Some of those, like if you want to move water and lease it, you want to lease some of your allocation to Lou, you're going to need to give some paperwork. The GSA has to process it. I don't think that has to go through 218. I think it's part of the administrative fees, but it shouldn't be layered on everybody else because you're doing something unique. So there might be a $100 processing fee or some of those things. So that's what
you don't have to do 218s for basically services.
Yeah. So I think it falls under that, and Jeannie can correct me where I've misspoken. If she wants.
No misspeak so far.
Wow. All right, so does that answer your question on that? Okay.
When is the next 218 process gonna get started?
So there is a ad hoc, phase 2 fee ad hoc committee that has been established. It has met like once to try and start some conversations about whether or not it wants to deal with projects or only admin, and it's leaning to the admin only side. And so that will define what we start to talk about on fees. And I apologize, I'm like facing this way.
No, that's fine.
Okay,
Is this a separate, a possible ad hoc committee than the strategic ad hoc committee
Yes.
working on the allocation?
yes,
That's one of the questions I want to ask.
that was.
Is the gonna be minutes from the strategic ad hoc committee working on allocation? Is that gonna be available before it's presented in a public meeting and on a regular meeting? Because there's gonna be a lot there. I mean,
You're seeing some of this conversation here.
okay,
So those ad hocs do not have to take, they're not governed by the Brown Act. They don't have to take minutes.
they don't have to take minutes.
And that's why there's other ad hocs. So it's another subgroup of board members that can get together to talk about another topic. Like there's a demand reduction one that's been dealing with the LRP.
We're taking minutes, but they don't have to take minutes.
Because you're an official Brown Act elected body. Appointed body,
Yeah,
sorry,
not elected, but
appointed. Volunteer, voluntold.
I empathize with your frustration. We see this, it feels like it's already been baked.
It doesn't seem to be consistent.
The cake's been baked by the time we get it. But
What were you
hopefully
pointing
not.
out?
George has a question.
Oh, okay, George, question.
Who is on that ad hoc committee?
Which one?
Phase 2?
The one you just finished discussing?
The
The
strategic ad hoc that's working on.
Prop 218.
The Prop 218, the phase 2, Prop 218. Ashley's looking.
Lloyd, Bob, and Nick.
Lloyd, Bob, Giampoli, and Nick. That answer your question, George?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And that committee is not the committee that's working on allocation policy. It's
The phase.
working on what?
two
Phase 2.
fees, Right.
Yeah, who's on the allocation policy now?
The strategic
Planning. ad hoc
planning
committee?
ad hoc committee is
Mike, Nick, and Gina.
Mike Gallo, Nick Marchini, and Mike and Gino. And then the demand reduction
Did Nick replace Eric?
and the demand reduction ad hoc,
Is Lloyd, Gina, and Nick.
yeah, and when there's only 6 people and some people don't want to volunteer,
Another few.
it's a challenge, right? Like, yeah. So that's, we're trying, Bob, to your point, the reason why we wanted to continue to have this conversation and start talking through these things is because we want to talk about them as best we can. The ad hocs bouncing around different ideas. We're trying to be transparent and bring information and give as much time. It's also why rolling something out and then starting to pilot it is going to allow us to further find if there's challenges we need to revisit. Which is why, again, going way back to why we broke this into 2 phases is to try and give us enough time for working on an allocation so it's not going to actually start until calendar year 26 when it officially starts mattering. So going back to the monitoring section, there's going to be talk about methodology, tracking consumption, the potential use of flow meters, the how we're going to handle capital operations or animal facility operations. Also production facilities that might be on ag zone parcels. For instance, there's some processing plants. I think Nick even mentioned he's got Radicchio processing facility. He's not sure if that parcel is zoned ag or not. But if it's zoned ag, then it's getting an allocation and it uses water, and we need to make sure we're accounting for that use of that water. And so those are just going to be discussion of the data sources. Then we go to the opt-in process where we'll talk about how we're gonna allow that opting in on some sort of frequency basis. It's not a continual opt-in. The intent is to have an open window every once in a while. The policy framework that was drafted in February, I think says it would be a 3-month window to opt in once every 5 years. That's probably what will get drafted in here for now for people's reaction. Again, appeals. So if you're appealing because of a land use classification that affected your ability to opt in, that's a different situation than you just choosing not to opt in on grazing or something like that. Enforcement, we'll talk about the authorities and the fines and all the elements that Sigma provides to the GSA for that element. And then scroll down, Adriel. And then appeals. Right now, this is the list of appeals topics. We discussed that last meeting. I mentioned it and we didn't send anything out because I wanted to make sure the ad hoc was still talking about all of these. This is not a exhaustive list, nor, and some of these things may condense, I don't know. And we may not have all of these defined by the time we go to adopt, but these are topics that would be considered for some sort of appeal.
What is AMA transactions? What's that acronym? AMA.
AMA is your allocation management account that we're going to talk about now. So if there is a transaction like, hey, you bought through a transfer allocation from Brad, and then somebody comes back and says, well, I actually didn't. And, you know, even though I gave you paperwork and there's some fight amongst you, we have to deal with it. There's a process we're going to have to think about. So
it's nice to see. I don't think it was ever really debated if they were going to allow transfer credits.
So let's go to pull up the AMA, Adriel, because that is one of the areas, again, being considered or being discussed would be allowing that within a sustainability zone. So let's first, yeah, we're probably going to need to pull up both and switch back and forth, Adriel, between the AMA and the definitions, because there's language in the AMA write-up. Adriel, are you going to be sharing that? Is that forthcoming?
Yes, sorry, I'm opening it up right now. Also, I do have a meeting at 3 o'clock that I need to jump to.
Okay, I forgot.
So I could share for a bit while Ashley gets it pulled up, and then we can.
My bad. You did
swap.
tell me before. How about if we
All right.
just pick Ashley's version up and we'll let you go to your other meeting?
Okay. Thank you.
It's 3 o'clock right now.
His meeting's at 3.
Yeah. We can go by that one if you want, but
Is it this one?
that's one of them. And where's the third one? Definitions would be the other one. Oh, this is a definition. So open the other one's AMA.
I need to download it or else it's just on this little.
Okay. So the AMA as a setup is going to talk about 3 things. And first, one of the things it's going to define is owners or common ownership. And maybe those definitions need to be further refined, but essentially an owner might be just you as an individual. Common ownership might be where it's you and the multiple entities that are farmed together, and that might be still within the same family, but it might also open up to if you're operating under a farm management company or some other representation that is pooling parcels together so you can manage the allocation across multiple parcels.
Needs to be flexibility there. There's so many different ways.
Yeah,
to
so
do that.
so right now there's 2 terms, one being owner and the other one being common ownership. What I believe the common ownership, while you're pulling that up, common ownership language.
What about versus some leasing?
We'll get to that in a minute because we're addressing that because that's going to have to be, you know, absolutely. Common ownership means a situation where multiple parcels within the GSA are owned and managed by either a single individual or multiple individuals or entities collectively, where each property is subject to the same fee, interest, easement, leasehold, or rental rights on the groundwater, where the groundwater is being used. This was borrowed fairly extensively from MID, from MSGSA and MID language, because we wanted to at least try and be consistent, but we couldn't call it their master account, because there's enough variance in terminology that we wanted to get the essence of it, but we're applying it in a slightly different fashion. So it's got that same sort of contemplations.
He's reinventing that.
I mean, unfortunately, we can't be exactly the same because there's enough variance there, right?
Just taking the gist of it.
So the, scroll down to common ownership, actually. So here we see that language I just read. And then if you go to owner,
Wait, sorry, Ashley, go up, give me 5 more seconds for that.
gotta be faster. I read the whole thing just a minute ago.
I know, but it makes more sense when I see it.
We're not asking for your edits right now. There
Okay.
may be things to edit, but we're just trying to flavor
Yeah.
some stuff for
I
the
just wanted to
conversation.
understand it. Yeah, we're good,
So
Ashley.
now if you scroll down to owner,
And then the people on Zoom, you can see this document, right?
can Zoom see this document?
Yes.
Thank you, Larkin.
Yes.
So owner means any person owning a fee interest or lessor interest, such as an easement, leasehold, or rental in the real property within the GSA on which groundwater is used, as reflected in the assessor's records or documents provided regarding leasee or leaseor. So trying to address that. Sometimes the lease conditions are only a year. Sometimes they're a couple years, sometimes they're 10, 20, 30 years, right? So we're trying to accommodate all those situations to let you be able to go ahead and go over to the allocation management account part. That within your groundwater accounting platform account, if you have a lease land, you have that as one of your parcels you're managing. And so we're trying to set that up. But one of the things to recognize, especially going forward, if you're gonna, let's say we're in 2030 and you're now leasing I'm leasing some property to you, I need to tell you how much allocation is coming with that. And
It needs to be in your agreements.
well, right, but the GSA needs to be told that too, so then it can shift that portion out of my account and into your account and track that appropriately.
So is
So
this gonna be updated once a year? Because
Once a year, yeah.
leases change.
right, once a year, we're gonna have to have a window where that information is either
Updated.
accepted as the same or updated in some manner. So those are some of the details.
Irrigated land does the same thing.
What's that?
Irrigated land has
Yeah.
to do the same thing.
Yeah. And there's gonna be a upload tool process where stuff can get pushed up through the platform, so you can scan and submit some lease agreement or something that allows us to have that data associated with that action. So let's look through the allocation management account, which we're now gonna be referring to as AMA. This is your farm unit, for lack of a better way to say it, but since you have an account in the groundwater accounting platform, we figured this is a good way to just manage your allocation in your account. So that's where we kind of created that term. Open to changing that. That's not stuck in mud.
We'll be using it in like 60 years.
So if you now start to scroll through this, actually, the owner would register their parcels through the groundwater accounting platform that recognize either as an owner or common ownership and are within the same sustainability zone. So your account is going to be limited to your sustainability zone. So you can't have an account that's in sustainability zone 3 and sustainability zone 1 and try and make those as one. Because again, the zones are identified as hydrogeologic kind of representations that down the road, there's the flexibility that those sustainable yield numbers and other provisions might start to vary by those sustainability zones as we collect more data and refine that. So we can't let your accounts cross over.
Slow down.
Yes.
This is anecdotal here, but I've got a contiguous property in 3 sustainability zones. How does my account not cross over?
You better get special treatment.
That you never brought to,
It wouldn't
attention.
qualify for the appeal process because it was more than 300 acres.
On each one.
Okay,
I looked at it. So I've got,
Unique location.
I've got 3 sustainability zones.
okay, so we're gonna, that's gonna need to be an appeal. I recognize this is anecdotal. It's gonna probably need to be an appeal process. When these were getting set up by Chris and his team, there were accommodations as best we could to try and not have that kind of subdivision for where there's common ownership, but it happens. It's like, it's inevitable. So since it exceeded the 300, it can't automatically qualify. Well, and it's past December 20th.
Yeah,
But the appeal opportunity for making that point can be considered by the board.
but otherwise I can't, because I've been wondering how this, okay.
Otherwise, your yield is gonna be within each one of those. Now, one element, is it on
It
here?
wouldn't matter. 'Cause you're all connected anyway, so you could run.
So
out of it
scroll,
down here.
scroll down a
I
little
figured
bit.
I figured I'd make it work, but like if I don't get,
I'm not sure if it's in this definition, and it might be, or sorry, in this representation, or it might have been back up in definitions. The strategic ad hoc is contemplating if it's common ownership within a half mile of the sustainability boundary, that will be allowed to get merged.
this is all contiguous. Yeah, it's all
Right,
common ownership,
but-
all contiguous.
But if it's a 3-mile strip that runs all the way down to some really low
It's
groundwater area,
It's more than 3 miles.
well, I get that. It's like, what,
I know what
again, with
I know
the
what you're
framework of trying to stay within a hydrologic conditions, we don't want you to be able, a grower to be able to shift all their allocation to concentrate on one area and create a hotspot and bring the basin into non-compliance because we're sucking hard in one area because they're
At the
moving
detriment
all
of
their, it's the detriment of others by moving all the allocation into one concentrated area. That's the concept. As long as we can address those kind of concerns and think about it, appeal processes are available for that. If we look back on the appeal, one of the appeal topics, I can look at it here real quick, so you have to pull it up, was it does an incorrect land use classification, but I didn't talk about that there. So there's probably need to add some more definition around the appealing of that. Somewhere is that half mile part. I think it might be later in this conversation here.
And backing up on that half mile, you're saying if a landowner has another piece of property within a half mile, the ad hoc committee is contemplating an appeal. And the idea there, I'm assuming and extrapolating, I don't know what the thinking is, you could stop irrigating here to move you would want to have those properties in the same zone because you can share water in the same zone.
You could share that water if you're within a half mile of the boundary and it's your same owners of that. There's that potential because we recognize there's boundary crossovers.
Right.
Or land, your farming your active parcel and field might not align with APNs or some other considerations such that it would make sense that just gets incorporated into one account.
So in February, the ad hoc committee framework was released, and underneath the allocation by land use category, it says grouping of shared or like designated parcels would be allowed under to be developed rules. That's what you're talking about.
So that's what these are, the grouping of parcels or the to be developed allocation management within a zone with the potential half mile element considered. So I got to see where that language was, if it's down here a little bit further.
Sorry to be
Now you're understand.
a little slow here, but I'm guessing the fact set is Bob owns 2 parcels in the same zone within a half mile of each other. He can share allocation from one parcel to another is the idea.
That's the idea, is to try and give the flexibility to the growers to operate consistent with kind of historic farming flexibility.
Right.
But not to go now start buying new property and start trying to
So Bob buys,
essentially
but you can
move.
only maybe share property within water within zones. That's been the discussion so far.
Right, so you can't start moving water and essentially shift your water 5 or 10 miles away into another zone. And what you're not doing is not shifting the water, you're shifting the allowance to pump, which causes more pull in one area, create more domestic well issues and other things that the GSA is responsible for and needs to be mindful of. So it's in
That makes sense to me.
in that context, trying to put those right bounds. I know that half mile was in here somewhere. I just got to see where it is. Sorry, it's bugging me now. It might be back in definitions. Anyway, let's continue down this.
Just one question.
Sure.
You may get to this. How about the growers that have recharged? Those water credits resulting from recharge, is that going to be managed in this allocation management account, or is that a separate account for that?
That account will, because the platform will have the ability to have a recharge quantity included that you, as the recharging party who's been given that credit, will be able to manage according to the policy that's yet to be developed. That policy might have some other flexibilities associated with it and some other limitations associated with it.
Like leave behind and how far away you can recharge, pull the groundwater back out.
But you could pull it out right here and put it in some sort of conveyance and move it further away, possibly. So it's like that. But if you're,
This is just the beginning of the whole groundwater.
The market.
Movement of groundwater credits and trading. That's what we're working on.
And
here.
all of this, the GSA is coming about from the perspective of if you got to be conscientious of water's movement, and we can't allow the shifting of an opportunity to pump in a way that creates an adverse effect where that new pumping is occurring because the water didn't actually move there subsurface. And so we have to be making those considerations, right? So
I think that's a good way to do it. I mean, I guess but it still has to be in the same zone is what they're thinking. So
that makes the most sense right now. If somewhere down the road, there's some reason why
isn't it just I'm devil's advocate? I'm not saying I disagree with you. Why isn't it just a half mile? Whether it's the same zone or not.
Corcoran Clay comes to depression.
There's a variety of things that kind of went into the establishment of those zones that we're considering some of those aspects. Corcoran Clay, other hydrogeologic considerations. But one of the premises that was in the framework in February is the GSA intends to revisit this and start and continue as more data and understanding is brought forward to make adjustments. Again, at the end of the day, if we can't show improvement to the state that our groundwater levels are coming up and we are getting to the objectives, sustainability objectives, eliminating subsidence and raising groundwater levels, we're going to be brought in front of the state at some point. So in that context, we're just trying to give as much flexibility, but limit risk.
Yeah. And we have to stop pumping. I get that.
Right. So it's all of this, the strategic ad hoc is trying to balance all of these things in these conversations and developing these approaches. So if we go back, so do you want me to continue on the allocation? Any online questions yet at this point?
Is it set up to where Merced ID can just input the water that they've sold to account outside of the district?
I think if they sold water to an account like in LeGrand through the new canal, that information is going to have to be provided by the AMA holder. So whomever has that contract is going to have to give that to the GSA. Here's my receipt.
It's not going to be a automatic.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Because that means we'd have to somehow have
It might be on both sides. So Well, they're on the platform on their side, so they're all the water.
Right, but how they're feeding that and how they're pushing that up to the platform is really the interface. It isn't necessarily the data management tool behind it.
Got it. I know, it's another complexity, but.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
it'd be nice to have it. Other GSAs have it.
Slowly but surely. Remember, this GSA has, who said it, one staff essentially.
I like the fact that we've gone slow here. Other GSAs have gone right into it and then figured out later after bills are going out.
There's a lot of,
Cleanup messes with money and water is not fun.
and again, that is why we went to that two-phase approach
I
and
like
trying to be able to essentially give us time, but get DWR to accept and Miagusa to accept that we were moving.
We got the GSP.
And we got the GSP approved, and there are other places in the valley that did not, so just, let's be happy. All right, so going to this first subsection is about leasing. So to facilitate tracking and temporary assignment of an allocation upon leasing of parcels. So in this case, an owner is going to want to lease a parcel to another party. They're going to make available with that possibly some portion of their allocation. Remember, we're also working with 5-year buckets. So you're going to have a chunk of water available in your allocation management account, your AMA, and we're going to want to say, I'm going to give 100 units to you when you lease this property. Or possibly more, or possibly less. You might be leasing the ground because you're going to dry land farm it, and you could pay it less because the leaseor is holding on to the allocation. They're just giving you the ground to go operate for something, right? So there's flexibility both ways, but we need those parties to tell us what is getting associated with that lease and some term information. And the GSA is going to review the transaction. I know it says approve or deny or add conditions. I think that's just, it has to be there. I don't think we're in a position where we're going to be truly approving and denying aspects of the financial terms of any kind of lease, nor do we need to see that. It really has to do with the water. And the denial might be, hey, I'm gonna give this entity on the lease more water than you have available to you. And we need to have a say in that, right? Or some other potential conditions. So those things are there. I don't know if we'll have all that detailed out. We'll continue to work on that. Monitoring, the lease parcel and its allocation is assigned to this new account. So in the groundwater accounting platform, it'll go from me to you. And it's now in your account with the chunk of water that goes with that. And so we're going to need to make sure that monitoring is also reflecting that change. So that's why it's going to be a window open each year for those kind of lease information.
Is there room for ambiguity there? Like, as far as, does it need to, it all comes down to the actual landowner, or
designated representative? Or what do you
I'm
think?
just saying that there's room for people to go point fingers, right?
Right, that's why the GSA needs something, so it's absolved of that liability. You guys go back and figure that out between the parties assigned the lease.
Yeah, I'm just raising the question, so.
Well, I think the question ultimately that you guys are gonna need to have or provide input to us is, what does that look like? So we limit the liability of the GSA and those responsibilities of whether or not you had water or whether you used it or who got paid what.
Yeah.
Happens back down to the leaseor and leasee and isn't.
I think it comes to the landowner on the deed. That would be
Yeah.
that'd be my comment.
I would think so too.
But in some cases, that landowner is an East Coast
Yeah, but then
absentee firm, right? And they've designated a responsible party.
Well, you can, I mean, even the farm manager should be able to chase that down. I mean, if it's something important water rights these days, I think it should go to the landowner.
Yeah, I think so too, because the renter, they might not be looking long-term and they don't care about long-term. They're just looking about next year or two and,
Right.
you know, what I
And
mean,
if the landowner, if it's a 5-year bucket and the landowner's stuck with the bill at the end of it, I think the landowner should be the one on the hook.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, as far as who ultimately, yeah. I mean,
The landowner's on the
there's-
hook, but as far as the evidence for the GSA to decide where to make the allocation, there should be a form and it should be signed by the landowner on the deed. That's my opinion.
so like this letter.
or a designated representative. I think we're gonna have to keep that open.
Sure.
Well, the problem's tied to the land, right?
Right.
When these folks are, setting this up, is some of that gonna be spelled out for them, or?
It's, right now, those pins are gonna be given to the property owner of record.
Mhm.
So in some cases, that is an address on the East Coast. And now there's gonna be opportunity where they could designate within the platform, so you're their farm manager.
Mhm.
They designate you, give you the ability and the login credentials. But at the end of the day, the title and the deed are in their name. So if there's ever any action the GSA needs to take and potential liens on the property or any of that that might occur, it's gonna be to the property and to the title.
I'm just thinking of, your farm manager gets fired or leaves or sold. I mean, people are gonna have to really watch this. It's just one more thing.
How's it go with irrigated lands right now? You don't have the person back in the East Coast filling out the forms, right? Somebody local is filling out some of that stuff and complying. And same sort of issues arise there. So we're not gonna be able to answer every one of those.
No,
things,
I
right?
know, don't take me the wrong way.
No, I'm not.
I'm throwing out some seeing what's
Yeah.
gonna happen.
And this is why there will be more administrative costs associated with operating this nice state mandated Sigma thing. All right, scrolling.
Larkin has a question.
Oh, Larkin, sorry, go ahead.
What's the purpose of having it just be traded once a year? When leases made happen at different times of the year. So, maybe somebody would take out their summer crop and turn the ground over in the fall or something like that. So how come we don't have the ability to do it all the time?
Primarily the monitoring of consumptive use is going to be like a month behind, and being able to track that and that associated who's responsible, what bucket that's coming out of, whose bucket, just gets more and more complicated. I think I understand what you're saying, and that flexibility you're asking for. Let's continue through the piloting phase. Let's see, and let's just continue to discuss that, Larkin. I don't know if there's an easy answer that isn't just creates a potential mire of administrative burden.
The one nice thing about from, if the open bucket were November through February, is nobody's irrigating, or open time, kind of open enrollment, so to speak, is November through February, nobody's irrigating anyway. So you can start with, kind of a clean slate there.
But things change throughout the year as well, right? I mean, owner gets better.
Yeah, they can. It would get sold with the existing bucket.
Okay.
Yeah, presumably.
Larkin, you have some more?
Yeah, I think that we're probably going to end up going to, a lot more row crops. And so for flexibility purposes, there's probably going to be a lot of winter crops grown more than traditionally, I would guess. And so, I don't know. It makes more sense to me. It's going to be a month behind, whether it's in December or July. So I'm not sure, if that really makes a difference. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, let's continue to think about that. I understand the ask. We're ultimately monitoring on a calendar year basis. And so if you designated a couple of inches to somebody to come lease it for 3 months, how do we, maybe if you get addressed in your lease, that it's your water, it's still staying in your allocation bucket, and you're just leasing the property, and we don't have to worry about changing that account. You just handle it for them or something on that parcel standpoint. I don't know. Let's continue to think about that. But I get the desire.
George, you had your hand up. Did you still want to say something?
No, I don't.
So scroll down, Ashley. So now we're going to get to allocation upon sale, because we know there's lease and now there's sale. So when you truly sell a parcel, you're gonna sell it with or without water potentially. I could see situations where you may sell a parcel off possibly for solar or something like that, and you do not move the water allocation with it. So this section is about that sale, similar to the lease aspect. GSA needs to be informed about what's moving with that property and what's the parcel and who it's going to, and so we can appropriately adjust the account and make sure the account's being adjusted properly. Does that make sense? Makes sense. We talked through lease, sale kind of seems to fall from that. We'll scroll down. The next one to contemplate is this transfer between allocation accounts. This would be allow for the originator and the recipient, and again, these are two definitions that are in the definition section, where you as the owner apply to transfer a portion or the entirety of your allocation to another allocation management account, so long as sufficient water is available for that transfer, and one of the following criteria applies. This is where the half mile thing pops up. The originator and recipient are within the same sustainability zone. So Lou, you can transfer some water to Brad. The next one, but I'm in another sustainability zone, so you can't transfer to me. That's what's being contemplated right now at this point. Again, thinking about those hydrogeologic movement of water and timing. The next aspect is if the originating and receiving are under common ownership and in neighboring sustainability zones where those parcels are located within a half mile on a buffer. So you essentially, without trying to merge those parcels from one account to in zones, you could transfer to your adjoining parcels
in a different zone.
In a different zone, so long as it's within that half mile with kind of a non-issue.
Since you're in three, you can just go.
You transfer it to yourself. It's kind of what's
Not half mile.
contemplated there.
But these two are within a half mile and these two are. So once it gets over.
We're thinking about that. We gotta watch that gaming because you could start and then you suddenly have you moved water. Again, put on the hat of trying to maintain
I just gotta
hydrogeologic
put it all in the same zone.
No doubt.
contemplations.
I think they'll be reasonable.
So that's what's being thought about here. And part of that also is common ownership. You might have somebody doing farm management for a couple of different owners who are neighboring, but otherwise aren't owning the same and don't want to put it in the same zone for whatever other reasons that might not come to fruition. So that was being contemplated. The parties subject to the transfer have to submit that information to the GSA. There will be a transaction fee associated with it. Again, this paperwork stuff. And we're going to assess the consumption against the updated allocation amounts. It should say sustainability zone. Oh, the aquifer zone. Sorry, this is talking about Corcoran clay. There might be limitations on moving of that water if it's above or below the Corcoran clay. That has to be determined. All transfers must sunset by January 1, 2030. So you could enter into a multi-year deal right now where I'm going to sell you some water every year. That has to sunset by January 1, 2030. You could enter into a transfer in 2029 only for that year. The reason for that is because we are also reassessing, the intent is to reassess a lot of this stuff, which might include modifying sustainable yield to address things that are that have been contemplated and been discussed. And so we can't get in a situation where you might have a 20-year transfer and then suddenly your water isn't really there the same way. There's a modification. Now we've created a liability issue for the GSA. So for this point in time, the ad hoc is contemplating that the opportunity to transfer has to have a sunset on your transfer deal.
By the next,
By the update.
Next update.
For the update purposes of updating.
And when there's an update, the sustainable yield will be evaluated. Presumably the APA will be evaluated.
Yeah.
And in fact, the APA, if it's
supposed to go away at some
it
point.
should go away.
It's not by 2030 though. APA doesn't
It's supposed to go away by 2036. 10 years, but it was also being contemplated with
With
some might actually be more stable, and in that case, you might actually see some of that APA become part of a sustainable yield that's different than another area.
Right.
And so we can start defining sustainable yield differently, but we don't have the data to do that today. Which is why, again, we have those two things and the rule about 2015 levels, maybe pausing that ramp down. Again, it's contemplations a lot out in the area of zone 8 for the conditions out there.
Off the cuff, I think this is a pretty good job. I'll think about it, but I think it's a pretty good job. My plea would be, and I've said this before, although I'm not sure how it was heard, is when it's reviewed in 2030, and APA, at that point, because we have all the data gaps, also review the sustainability zones to see if those need to be redrawn.
Yeah, I would agree.
And, you know,
I'll just do with. I give it to you, that's fine.
that might help, you know, Larkin's concerns, and I know it could help
Right.
people's concerns at that point.
Right. Well, and I think as we've chatted about with Larkin and the unique circumstances, there may be other ways to address some of that with equivalent of a recharge consideration, another bucket that's independent of the native yield for the interim. Again, we don't want to end up with 1,100 unique situations. Right. This is, we're trying to manage our geographic area locally as best we can to keep the state away, recognizing that if we go crazy with how we deal with this everywhere, we got massive administrative burdens and a lot of challenge there. So it's, you know, this goes back to the principles that were adopted over a year ago with simplicity, flexibility, trying to accommodate all of these aspects, some levels of certainty. You're pretty certain we're going to revisit this, but it's also pretty certain it's not going to have significant changes. It might have minor, well, it might be major to some, but it might have variances that you know, further refine numbers, but it's still going to be the ideas of some sort of sustainable yield and some sort of zones that are hydrogeologically connected. So that's a level of certainty. So now, if there's no more kind of questions on that language right now, and again, we're not asking for editorial, we are asking for thoughts on what we're presenting. This is consistent with where the ad hoc is looking and it's discussing and developing.
Yeah, I think it's implied that within the half a mile sustainability zone buffer area, that is the same ownership. The ad hoc committee might want to, that's certainly implied when you extrapolate it, that it's under common ownership. The ad hoc committee might want to add that it's common ownership as of a specific date, because there could be a little bit of brinksmanship if somebody were to buy something nearby. Granted, that's supposed to sunset by 2030. The way the language reads is it's clear that it's supposed to be the same ownership, because if Ashley were to scroll up a little bit more, the line item I is not contemplating common ownership. So, you know, but common ownership could become post a certain date the same owner. So there could be some open room for brinksmanship there. But otherwise, I think, I mean, other than my unique circumstance, everybody else is going to be.
But also, even if there is, and they become common owners or lease parcels and stuff, we're also talking within a buffer zone where it just kind of says, look, there's some, the hydrogeologic movement and
yeah, maybe that's
water situation is not that clear and distinct as a line. And so maybe it's okay.
Yeah, maybe that's fine. Yeah. I just didn't know if that's what they were implying by omitting the common ownership aspect of it.
I don't think it was necessarily contemplated to ignore or to explicitly restrict in that way. I think it was,
in which case I think the way it reads
kind of creating some broad. So I want to, Bob, maybe you have some questions, but I do want to circle back to some of the representation you guys were asking for and how it plays into some of this and the thought contemplations overall, because it will have to get potentially addressed in those definitions of some of these definitions of that policy, right? Whether it's in the appeal or not.
Want me to continue sharing this or?
Did you have any?
No,
You've been
I
taking
was
notes,
ju- I
you've
was
written
just-
down every page, every word.
Well, it helps me to
know.
understand it when I write things down.
That's fine.
Um,
Just giving you a hard time. Paul.
I know. Will we get a copy of this draft so then we can actually,
Not yet.
not yet?
The
When will-
ad
when will
hoc
that-
is trying to meet again
I think early next week.
early next week. We're trying to have the ad hoc and they're supposed to be feeding us more thoughts. Jeannie has weighed in on some definitions.
This isn't Brown Act, so this isn't public.
It's
Wait,
public.
wait, this is the,
It is a working draft that we're walking you through the concepts. There is no official document that's publicly available.
will there be this available before it's actually drafted?
I think the intent is to have more of this available for the June conversation at the June board meeting. So then we can have more time, and I would just suggest that the ad hoc has a meeting between the June board meeting and the July board meeting, maybe one or two, to talk about that language more. But we gotta be cautious of getting out in front of.
I can appreciate that, but I could also appreciate the fact this is complicated, and to just sit down here and talk about it, it's hard for me to come up with questions that I might have.
Totally understand. And what I would ask is that you guys, as members, you talk about concepts, you ask questions, you send emails to Ashley, and we continue to get that feedback, not as TAC, but as no different than when we were talking about it at board meetings or at the public workshop we did at the Farm Bureau, or the conversation that you led out there or Bob led at LeGrand Athlone. It's like, we're trying to get input on these ideas and this policy and further framing. We're trying to flavor more of that, so it triggers more thoughts and questions and helps us. Because the last thing we want to do is drop something with no time. It's also why I prefaced all of this with the thing getting adopted in July may not be this to its fullest extent, but should at least be what gets water, those different essentially the policy that was written up in February and the allocation numbers, and some of these other, like this allocation management account stuff, I think should be pretty spelled out. And we should have time to be able to get that in front of you, get time to refine it and revise it so that it can be approved in July. Why do we want to improve it in July? So the GSP update can reflect these numbers and this representation. And we can characterize in prose in the GSP. We don't plan to include this document as an attachment to the GSP.
But just to reiterate the point, and I know there's no perfect way, but when we are the technical committee and you go over a written document and we don't get to look at
I
it
know.
and it goes back, it feels like, oh, thanks for including us, but not really.
I know. So we asked this morning if ad hoc was okay with us discussing it with you, and 2 of the 3 got back to us and said, yes, so long as you framed it as it's working draft. This has not been in front of the board, all those kind of things and those contemplations. So there's always this question of daylighting of when to get out in front. So please understand, Ashley and I are trying to walk that line as best we can with Jeannie's advice. I want to get materials out to you. We potentially could send them out if the ad hoc could say, yeah, this is available to the TAC. We also know that, because it happens even at other levels, at the board levels and other things. Stuff that gets out will get out. So I don't want to get papers sent out that then suddenly gets emailed to the next thing you know, it's getting shared everywhere, and the ad hoc hasn't felt like it's settled on that.
But if the ad hoc gives the board a version, it gives the board a version
Throwing money.
to adopt. Like, there's one.
Prior to that, you guys should get absolutely.
If that doesn't happen, that's disingenuous.
What I would imagine, what I would like to see is our June 12th, what's the June?
We should
date?
do 2 meetings, I would
So
say.
the June date should be something that's essentially the full public draft. that's then to be contemplated for February. So there's a full 30-day period for everybody to be thinking, for you guys to also weigh in as TAC, because you have I would say a little more,
Ideally, we get to see it
Prestige
before.
before the June, right? And so if we can get it out before the June to you guys, so then you can provide input and be in a position, you know, whether we can meet before then, I don't know, because this has to be an in-person meeting. But you can be in a position.
Can it go from the ad hoc committee to us and then back to the ad hoc committee to present?
I believe, Jeannie, what's, sorry to put you on the spot. Did you hear that question from Brad?
Repeat it, please.
Can the ad hoc committee present this policy to the TAC committee or ask the TAC committee for comments before they present it to the board?
I think that's up to the ad hoc committee and yeah, I mean, they can. It's a policy decision for them, though, whether they want to do that before they get their board's input.
Some of these concepts have been contemplated by the full board. So it's.
Whether we have an
I
effect
think-
or not, I think doesn't matter, I think, but giving us a
Right.
voice is different.
The intent is to try and get this stuff so you guys can have input.
We're really not gonna get input. I just say not come.
I get it. I get it. I totally get it, Brad.
You're part of the team, that guy.
Wow, it's just wasting my time.
Yeah.
If we don't get to comment, for real.
Yeah, well, and I'm hoping and I know this is just running through words on a screen, but trying to get some initial
Yeah.
comments as to
No.
whether as we're starting to add more pieces to it, if we're in the right direction, we can have something maybe with a little more flesh on the bones that you guys can review prior to it going out to the public and get some input back to the ad hoc or the full board. I think that's the goal. That's the intent of what TAC was originally designed to do. There's some of the logistics and challenges. I don't want to be making presumptions.
If I could say something, I agree with Bob and Brad. I need to digest this stuff and I can't come up with like really thoughtful questions on the spot. I need to go back and read it and make sure that it's not already in there and, you know, mull it over for quite a while. So it kind of does seem like, you know, we're almost a box checking committee now just to run it by the public instead of actually, you know, being concerned about our thoughts if we're not allowed to go over the material before it's proposed. So, you know, I mean, if you guys want the best, you know, advice from us, I think that we should be able to run over the material. That's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
We could all lobby some of the ad hoc committee members, you know, give them a call.
What was our, we were asking for ad hoc. We had some dates coming back. What are those dates that they're?
That was just about to. Give me a second.
Because what I'm trying to think of is let's look at some timing and see where we can schedule your next meeting. If we can get that set before the June meeting and intend to have a written document as much information as is in that as one document. Right now, again, it says 3 just because it's easier to kind of work that, but we intend to merge it into one.
Yeah.
And have that available for your review and then conversation and then further input. So
right now, 2 out of the 3 committee members said they can do May 16th in the afternoon. So it looks like it's probably gonna be May 16th in the afternoon.
So that's later this week.
That's quick.
Yeah, so I mean, we're trying to push them along on this stuff too. So if we get something from them and maybe we get it to a point where we can make it available to you guys before the end of the month and then have a meeting the week of the 3rd of June, which would be the full week prior to the board. And then you could have some thoughts. You would have had several days and, you know, apologize, it wouldn't be like weeks to look at language and get something,
Better
get
than
some
nothing.
thoughts. And then be able to maybe even make a recommendation at the board discussion on the 13th. So is that, so,
Yeah.
and then have another meeting later in June to further provide contemplation and thoughts and other things as it moves towards July. If that works, then we should look for a date that might work for you guys as TAC the week of the 3rd, with our intent to try and get something to you before the week of during the week of the 27th. 27th is Memorial Day. And then so you got the rest of that week there. So does anybody have any date options on the week of the 3rd?
I could do the 3rd. I can do other dates too, but
I cannot do, I am down in,
That week's all open for me.
I'm gone Thursday.
what about, you're gone Thursday? That's the 6th.
Yeah, 6th is not available for me.
What about the 3rd?
3rd is available.
Third works for me.
Try to, you know, if we don't get something to you till the 29th or 30th, does that give you, by the 3rd, does that give you enough time?
I'll make it work.
I can do the 3rd or the 4th.
Well, yeah, don't give it to us on the 3rd. Meet
Give it to you on a 3rd, meet on the 3rd. We'll give it to you at 1:59 and meet at 2 o'clock.
I gave you guys a shot.
I'm already on one of those boards. I don't want to be another.
Yeah. So what about the 4th in the afternoon?
George has his hand up real quick.
Sorry, George.
Oh, I'm out of town. I'm on vacation that week, so I'm unavailable.
If, oh, yeah, so,
Could you provide comment through email?
yeah, well, part of the thing also is to have a quorum to be able to make a recommendation.
I don't think we have enough people here now to determine.
Okay,
a
so
quorum, like with
Can you
everyone
do
here
it?
just went.
Can you do an email to TAC asking about the week of the 3rd and see what, either 3rd or 4th, and see what day,
What about the 5th?
or the
too?
5th, I guess, 3rd, 4th, or 5th, and see which day works best. Afternoons probably on any of those days.
Do
Yes,
you guys prefer morning or afternoon?
Afternoon.
I'll make anything work. I
Yeah.
can't do the 4th though.
I'm in the same boat.
you cannot do the 4th.
Cannot do the 4th.
Okay, so the 3rd or the 5th are your 2 days.
Correct, and I can make any time, morning, afternoons, those dates work.
Mondays I don't prefer, it's usually hectic, but make it work today.
That means you took too much time off on Sunday then.
Sorry.
I can make the 5th work too, or the 3rd.
Larkin, how about you for June 3rd and 5th? Do any of those days not work for you?
I'm better on a Tuesday or Wednesday than I am on a Monday.
So
Wednesday, the 5th is looking more appealing.
I'll send it out for both still, and we'll just
Okay.
see. Right, and then George, did you have another comment, or is this the same raised hand?
He's just excited today.
Me?
Oh,
I'm
George,
George got his hand raised.
Oh, it
Never mind.
came down. Can we talk about your this?
Okay.
And also the comment Ben made. 'Cause I'm thinking about it in construct of, and I want to get some more thoughts. So you guys weighed in, you independently gave information back as you're supposed to do. So you didn't violate the Brown Act. So appreciate you guys went through that path, and you have this recommendation here of trying to contemplate land that may have been, that wasn't being irrigated, but may have been irrigated. Well, one, there's a reclassification, it's wrongly classified. I think that one's absolutely, it's something we're already seeing. We're gonna see if we can get out in front of that so that we address it early rather than later. There are fee questions that are open to that. If you've been grazing as far as APN designation, you have been paying the non-irrigated 2019 fee, which is 50 cents instead of whatever, 450 or something an acre. So you've been benefiting there, and so was the GSA gonna go back and ask for all that payment? And then also a question of the phase one fee and whether there's a request for back payment on any of those lands. So that, it's in, the board recognizes this issue and is talking through it. The other one that was combined with this is part B, where you have demonstrated intent to irrigate their lands by making a material financial investment into earthwork or water infrastructure. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions to see if we could get some more insight from TAC members on that point. One is, what do you think would be the right evidence to demonstrate material financial investment? Spent $5. I mean, it's like is there something that would be contemplated, and maybe it's a refinement?
Yeah, I've got a dog in this fight, so I'll speak. And I haven't visited with the Crane family specifically, but Brad, I think, knows them relatively well. I've got a parcel of land where I drilled wells, so hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've got, leveled the land, tilled the land, getting ready for olives, about 200 acres. And then Sigma was coming, and I was like, I'm just gonna wait. I guess the question that I would have for the board is, this land was irrigated back, before I was born, forever ago. It has not been irrigated recently. We've been farming it. But recently I installed these wells, 2017 maybe. As it's currently designated, I feel like I was kind of a good steward, where I'm like, hey, let me wait to see how this whole thing goes. But I would be out of that investment, so to speak. I'd still get the sustainable yield, but that wouldn't be.
So let me clarify that it is currently in the assessor's office as grazing land,
Correct.
even though you drilled a well and you tilled it.
Correct. We're farming it.
Forever.
It's been farming since I was a kid, but we're still
Right.
farming it. We're just dry farming it.
Dry farming.
Right, so it's tax base is dry farming, grazing.
Presumably, yes.
And you got wells permitted
Mhm.
before the ordinance?
Mhm.
Okay, because afterwards, if you did, you probably would have
I
done.
would have been
Sigma.
the only one in the whole world.
You would have had to
that-
have done CEQA and
That's
would have
right.
demonstrated
Right.
some.
But they're
Okay.
county wells. I mean, we went to the county, we pulled the
Yeah, yeah,
permit, we
yeah,
paid
yeah.
all the money. The county's got all the records of them.
Now, what you want, the ask then, to make sure I'm understanding, the ask is that you get an APA.
Two asks specifically, but answer is yes. Ask one is we brought a pipeline with our pumping station all the way to the edge of this property. So as it's currently written, I can't share water back and forth
Right, because of
It's opt-in.
the opt-in says on that parcel only.
on that parcel only.
Right, okay.
So being able to connect that
Versus-
and get an API.
Okay,
And again, I would argue, and this is maybe controversial, that I was a good steward of the water here. Thinking, hey, let me pump the brakes, meanwhile, everybody else is going fence line to fence line. And see where this whole thing shakes out.
so, okay.
So to
Yeah.
your point of a material financial investment, I mean, I guess it could be on a per acre basis, or, to answer your question there. For my unique circumstance, I think the Cranes have a different one, but my unique circumstance,
Similar, but not the same.
yeah, my unique circumstance is, you could put a number on it, $100,000 of, I think we spent 400 grand, 500 grand drilling the wells.
I'd say more than that.
Yeah, probably more than
More
that.
than 100%.
So,
But that's my point, is if it's
But-
material, like anything in excess of.
let's, and I'm also cognizant that we're 4 minutes left.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. In Crane's situation, they have parcels they have not made investment in. But they're, I think, I don't want to put words in their mouth, and maybe you know better. Their intent is to want to be able to allow that yield, sustainable yield, to move to other parcels that
irrigated
currently
parcels.
farm,
They've owned, for, just to keep.
but not APA. They're talking about the sustainable yield.
Well, they. The APA as well. They,
I think
They had-
sustainable yield, I don't think they cry if they got sustainable yield.
they have, let's just say for rough purposes, you know, the families had 10,000 acres for generations, and then through the years, they decided what to plant, what to irrigate, what
So
to.
confused.
So instead of just planting everything, they decided what they had enough water for. And then now, after everybody else around them has planted wall to wall, and they're divvying up water, they're getting less water for not going wall to wall.
So my,
So had they just gone wall to wall, is the.
so the argument, and I've heard this argument, I'm not trying
I
to
know.
pass judgment one way or the other, but I'm gonna play devil's advocate of, was the reason it was not planted and irrigated just because they were trying to manage water, or there were other drivers like soil, commodity pricing, investment, all those things? And so how do we make that distinction? Because I could go to another parcel. Yeah, I was gonna, I decided not to, as a good steward, not to start irrigating, even though the land sucked and I was never gonna be able to plant it.
There's all kinds of one-offs we could
So,
debate.
right, so
I'm
so-
not here to.
No, I know you're not. I'm just trying to, I'm contemplating to try and see if we can get clarification about how we think about what is potentially appeal consideration, and this might just go in appeal, and it's gonna be the board's decision one-off as it is, right? I think that's your request, right? Is an appeal.
Yeah, this is
So they can hear common sense and say, you know what, they were trying to do the right thing, I can tell. People, you can tell.
And all those fit into. one or
I
two
don't know that, I
categories.
mean, I think you'd be, I have another anecdote, and I don't know why I'm forgetting his name, and I shouldn't. A cattleman, you know him, he's a little bit
Oh,
north.
yeah.
He, I was talking to him the other day, or this is about a year ago, I guess, when I was talking to him. And he says, well, wait a second. You know, he doesn't, he has an anecdote where he's got a bunch of contiguous rangeland, I guess, much like we do. But the fact that he didn't cross over, anyway, I guess it's the same argument as the Cranes. It's the same argument that the Crane families make.
Okay. That was all I was wanting, just further making sure I was understanding fully. And I think we will look at how that might draft into an appeal aspect.
Yep,
Because again, appeals are not automatic.
yes. How do you do that? How do you know who I'm talking? We did that with Raj the other day. You're like, oh, it's Raj.
Are there any other, in the interest of time, anybody online have anything they want to add?
The date we want to try to get us this weekend review is the 29th.
We're gonna, I think the 29th or 30th. I mean, part of my issue is I'm also on vacation through some of that, so I'm trying to make sure at some point I gotta take a vacation.
But in preparation for the June
Consultants are allowed
5th
to.
potential meeting, right?
Yes. Yes,
That will be emailed to everybody or.
be emailed to the TAC members.
I also have a neighbor who had the exact same circumstances I did with Trillium.
Okay. Any, so no hands online, any other comments or thoughts internally here? At this point, knowing that we're up against 4 o'clock time.
I would just like to go back and find out when we'll find out more about we talked about the groundwater conditions as of 2015, the average condition of each zone. When will that be determined? There, as we've had presented in the annual updates, they don't say what the average condition in each zone is. They're just saying this is what the monitoring wells show, and then they have a colored area. Brad brought that up. I think it's very important for us to know that.
Yes.
So I'd like to know when that information will be available.
I will work within the zones for my manage to get to that level, whatever, that's the marker, right? If you
Yeah,
get to-
if just, let us know how we can determine it.
So first off, I agree, because the framework currently says if groundwater levels increase to above the 2015 groundwater level minimum threshold for a period of at least 2 years, and other management criteria are above their level, then things can get adjusted or stabilized. Your point is, well, what defines that?
Yeah.
And that's very important because these sustainability zones are large.
Well, it's only gonna be the wells out in a couple of those white lands out by you.
Okay.
I'd like to see if I can get Bob to laugh.
As he
I-
jumped across the table.
Yeah, I understand, and this plays into all the other conversations we're also having about trying to create the confidence and the representation that what your situation is out there.
Oh, it's not just us. Everybody needs to know where they are.
It'll affect
We
everybody.
just need to know where we are.
I agree. And so how we do it, and whether we do it like we had played with, of trying to create those kind of averages and weighting it. And if we were more than 50% or something, and we did some things like that. But if there's only 2 wells in that zone, then what's that really telling you? The rest of it is all extrapolated based on a bunch of other stuff and some contour programming. I don't know what the
We gotta
right
get
answer
some
is.
engineers on that.
Yeah, I'll give Chris a call on the way home again and get some more thoughts on that, but
It's not a simple thing, because I've looked at some of those maps, and some areas are doing well within the same zone.
Yeah.
Some areas are doing well, some aren't, some are above.
it is not easy, and
I think the zones were supposed to match that. They sure don't.
It's impossible, pretty much, without doing 27 zones.
oh yeah, 110.
110.
But you're putting the same zone. You have some that are,
But we do need to know because that's gonna get
Yeah.
that's our mark.
that's the mark. That's what everybody's solving for. That's the entire problem.
Agreed. At the end of the day, the true mark is the defined representative monitoring wells, which are shown in the GSP, said these particular wells have a minimum threshold number. That's the true mark. But when we're talking about whether APA levels out,
It's the average.
we want to look at that beyond just that one well. That one well is important to reporting to the state. Doesn't have to be what governs us as the GSA. Obviously, there's a relationship. And we'll put all our recharge facilities right by those representative wells, so, you know,
Yeah.
nice mount. But you're right, we gotta define that.
I just don't want a opening that you can drive a truck through at the end of the day that the GSA will say, well, no, actually you didn't qualify, and
You never get there, no matter what, in the end. That's what we want.
Yeah.
I agree.
we just want
Yes.
to have a strict enough definition so we know what we have to manage, how we have to manage.
We need to manage to keep the state out, so they don't do what they're doing in Thule Basin.
What do you think of Mr. Crane? Because I know they've expressed concerns with, being, whether they get the APA or sustainability. I mean, the way it's going, it doesn't sound like it will.
Well, as long as there's an appeal process, I think that. What are you asking, what do I think they'll do?
No, what do you think about because as far as, them I know that they've done some irrigation work, but I don't think it's as black and, I guess mine's not black and white, but I don't think it's as easy as.
No, it's the concept of not, if you own the property for generations, you chose not to plan it out.
Yeah, and there's been some discussion about that. It just hasn't. It's not defined at this point, but the idea of if you previously owned, because you also have to think about, like down in Madera, you don't want to run on the grazing land where everybody's like, I'm gonna go out and buy 5,000 acres of grazing land just to shift the yield.
Yeah.
And I happen to be somebody who can afford to do that versus the 100-acre small farmer, or 50-acre farmer.
You can't let that, I agree 100%.
So there was contemplation about if you owned some parcels, you potentially could allow the sustainable yield to shift over onto your other parcels. But that's, there were some conversations, and we'll have to revisit that. I'm forgetting where the board ended up. At the current framework that's out there doesn't specify that. It doesn't mean it's not appealable. Anyway, we're past 4. Folks on the phone, thank you very much. We will work to get some draft out for the end of the month for a meeting with you, probably the 5th, but maybe the 3rd.
We'll send out a doodle shortly today because I might be serving jury duty tomorrow, so I'll send it out today.
Great.
Great, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you all online.
Appreciate it. I know it's a lot of work going on.
Thank you.
Yeah, see you, Brad.
Buying, 5,000 acres, because you can't just let it fall, like how the air board